You're just a useless old wallet, my daughter shouted, slamming a legal folder onto my farmhouse table. Sign over $700,000 today, or you're no longer family. My son-in-law pushed a pen toward me and smirked. You're old. That money will be ours anyway. I looked at both of them, closed the folder, and said, Then from today on, we are no longer family. 3 days later, my phone showed 98 missed calls. That night, the same daughter was kneeling outside my locked gate, begging me to open it. I'm grateful you're here with me. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever questioned whether someone close to you was being completely honest? I read every response, and your perspective matters. A quick note, certain details in this story are fictionalized for impact. But the heart of it, the lesson about trust and truth, is what I hope stays with you. The thick legal folder hit my dining room table with a sound like a judge's gavel, and my daughter's first words, in 4 months, were a number $700,000. But let me back up to dawn before the folder, before the number, before everything changed. I woke at 5:30 that Monday morning, the way I'd woken every morning for 40 years, alone in the farmhouse, the October fog pressing against the windows like wet cotton. At 70 years old, my body still kept farmer's hours. I brewed black coffee in the kitchen Clara and I had remodeled in 1987, back when our daughter was 12 and still called me Daddy. Clara had been gone 12 years. The grief had dulled to a permanent ache like arthritis in weather. I carried my coffee to the kitchen window and looked out at 400 acres of Iowa corn stubble disappearing into the fog. This land had belonged to my grandfather, then my father, then me. Every morning I stood here and thought of Clara sitting in these fields on summer afternoons, a book in her lap, the corn taller than her head. The calendar on the wall showed October 2nd circled in red pen. My handwriting. Today my daughter was coming home after 4 months of silence, 4 months without a call. But today she was coming home. I poured another cup and waited. The gravel drive announced her arrival at 8:30, the crunch of expensive tires on cheap stone. I heard 2 car doors slam, 2 sets of footsteps on the porch. The door opened without a knock. My daughter walked into my dining room like she was inspecting a property for sale. Yasmin was 38, a real estate broker whose polished exterior had always masked something harder underneath. She wore a black suit that probably cost more than my truck payment. Her husband followed behind her, silent and watchful. Marvin was 42, trim and cold-eyed, an ex-banker with a past he thought I didn't know about. I knew about the fraud conviction. I knew about the suspended license. I knew about the bankruptcy 3 years before they married. I knew a lot of things. Dad, Yasmin said. Not hello, not how are you, just the word flat as currency. She dropped the thick legal folder on my oak dining table. The sound echoed through the empty house. Sign it, she said. $700,000. We need it immediately. I looked at the folder. I looked at my daughter. I didn't touch the papers. Good morning to you too, I said. She exhaled through her nose like I'd said something stupid. Don't make this difficult. You're sitting on $11 million in assets doing nothing with them. We have opportunities, real investments. You're just hoarding wealth you'll never use. Marvin moved slowly around my dining room, his eyes scanning the built-in cabinets, the oak trim, the original hardwood floors, calculating, always calculating. This is about the land, I said quietly. This is about common sense, Yasmin snapped. Look at yourself, Dad. You're old. You're alone. You're making nothing out here. You're just a useless old wallet sitting on money that belongs in a young, active family. Useless old wallet. 4 months of silence from your only child teaches you something. Absence is a language, and she'd been speaking it fluently. I stood slowly and walked to the folder. I didn't open it. I just rested my hand on the smooth leather surface, feeling the weight of whatever documents were inside. 700,000, I said. Immediately, she repeated. There's a development opportunity in Des Moines, ground floor. If we don't move this week, we lose it. And if I say no, her eyes went flat. Then you're telling your only daughter you care more about your ego than her future, than your grandchildren's future. The grandchildren, Otto and Ren, 11 and 9 years old. I hadn't seen them since Clara's memorial service 2 years ago. Yasmin had stopped bringing them after I refused to co-sign a loan for a vacation property in Florida. You haven't brought my grandchildren to visit in 2 years, I said. But now you need $700,000 and suddenly their future matters. Don't make this about emotion, Yasmin said. Her voice had gone cold, transactional. This is business. You have assets. We have opportunities. It's basic portfolio management. My daughter wanted me to panic. She wanted to see me terrified, begging, signing anything to keep the peace. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who'd spent 6 months preparing for exactly this conversation. Yasmin's expression flickered. Just for a second. Uncertainty. What's funny? She asked. Nothing's funny, I said. I was just thinking about something your mother used to say. Don't bring Mom into this. She used to say you could tell who a person really was by watching how they acted when they wanted something. Not when they had it. When they wanted it. Marvin stopped his circuit of the room. Yasmin's jaw tightened. Sign the papers, Dad. No, I said. The word hung in the air like smoke. What? I said no. If a daughter's love costs $700,000, I choose to stop buying. Yasmin's face went white, then red. You stubborn, selfish old man. You're going to die alone in this house with nothing but your precious land and your precious pride. And when you're gone, we'll sell every acre of it anyway. Maybe, I said, but you'll have to wait. I grabbed my truck keys from the hook by the door, picked up my worn leather wallet, and walked out into the October morning without looking back. Behind me, I heard Yasmin's voice rise in fury, but I was already climbing into my truck, already turning the engine over, already pulling down the gravel drive. My daughter expected chaos. She expected me to panic, to cave, to sign anything to preserve the illusion of family. She didn't realize I had been preparing for this exact conversation for 6 months. I drove 3 miles before I trusted myself to stop shaking. Not from fear. From rage held at exactly the right temperature, hot enough to fuel action, cold enough to stay precise. The dim yellow light from my banker's lamp cast shadows across the legal document I'd carried home, and my reading glasses felt suddenly heavier on my nose. My office sat at the back of the farmhouse windows, facing the western fields. Clara had called it my war room. Oak desk weathered by 40 years of paperwork. Heavy safe bolted in the corner. File cabinets holding every deed, every patent, every contract that proved what I owned. I spread the document flat under the light. Page 1. Standard preamble. Legal entity names I didn't recognize. Page 2. Boilerplate language about consideration and transfer of assets. Page 3. More legalese dense and deliberately opaque. I read slowly. Every word, every clause, every subsection. Page 7 stopped me cold. I removed my glasses, set them on the desk, sat in total silence for 5 full minutes. Then I gave a single slow nod. The document wasn't a loan agreement. It wasn't a request for funds. It wasn't even a standard power of attorney. It was a deed of total transfer. Absolute conveyance of all assets. The 400 acres. The 3 agricultural patents generating royalties. The cash reserves. The commercial building in Des Moines I'd bought in 1998. Everything. The $700,000 was psychological bait. A number big enough to feel significant, small enough to seem reasonable, compared to an $11 million estate. She'd calculated I would focus on the amount, maybe negotiate it down, maybe ask for a repayment schedule. She'd calculated I would sign without reading to the end. A trap doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to understand exactly what the prey expects to see. I picked up my phone and made one call. Felix, I said when he answered. I need you at the farm tonight. Don't tell anyone you're coming. Felix Rawlings had been my attorney for 30 years, but more importantly, he'd been my friend. 65 years old, sharp as broken glass with a reputation for finding needles in legal haystacks. He'd handled my patents, my real estate transactions, and Clara's estate after she passed. "What happened?" he asked. "Something I should have seen coming," I said. "How soon can you get here?" 2 hours. Come to the kitchen door. Park behind the barn where the drive can't see your car." There was a pause. "Then, Morris, are you safe?" "For now," I said. "But I need to know exactly how much danger I'm in." He arrived after dark. I heard his sedan crunch across gravel, saw his headlights sweep past the barn and disappear. A minute later, 3 soft knocks on the kitchen door. Felix stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase and a laptop. He looked at my face and didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Show me," he said. I spread the document on the kitchen table under the dim overhead bulb. Felix pulled reading glasses from his shirt pocket and began at page 1. I watched him read, watched his expression shift from professional concentration to something harder. He opened his laptop and cross-referenced sections against a legal database. His fingers moved fast across the keyboard. Then they stopped. "Morris," he said quietly, "this legal entity, the one listed as the recipient of the transfer." "I don't recognize the name," I said. "It was incorporated 3 years ago, not 8 months ago when your daughter married." 3 years. The kitchen felt suddenly colder. "Before she even met Marvin," I said, "or she knew him longer than you think." Felix turned the laptop toward me. Corporate registration documents. Yasmin's name. A date from October 2020. "She's been structuring this for 3 years, Morris. This isn't opportunistic greed. This is premeditated asset seizure." I looked at the screen. My daughter's signature. 3 years ago, while Clara's grave was still settling. "There's more," Felix said. His voice had gone flat. "The lawyer who drafted this document, I recognize the formatting, the clause structure, the specific language." He pointed to the signature at the bottom of page 9. "It's your former family attorney," he said, "the one who handled Clara's estate." I stared at the signature. Gerald Whitmore, the man who'd sat at this exact kitchen table after Clara's funeral, who'd walked me through probate documents while I was too numb with grief to think clearly, who'd promised to protect what she left behind. There's a particular kind of pain that comes from seeing a signature you trusted for decades turned into a weapon against you. "He knows every asset I have," I said. "He knows how the patents are structured. He knows about the Des Moines property. He drafted the original deeds." "He knows exactly where to strike," Felix said. "And your daughter knows exactly how you think. She grew up watching you handle business. She knows you trust lawyers, that you respect contracts, that you'd never imagine your own family attorney would betray you." "And Marvin," I said. "He stood in my dining room this morning scanning every piece of furniture like he was taking inventory, because he already knew what he was looking at. He already knew what they were taking." Felix closed the laptop slowly. "Morris, this is conspiracy to commit fraud, possibly elder abuse charges, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty. But we need to move carefully. If they realize you know, they'll accelerate," I finished. "They'll file something before I can protect myself." "Exactly." I looked at the document on the table. 3 signatures at the bottom. My daughter, her husband, my trusted attorney. 3 people who knew me better than almost anyone alive. 3 people who'd calculated exactly how to erase me. "What's our first move?" Felix asked. "Documentation," I said. "Every asset, every account, every patent. I want photographs, notarized copies, third-party verification. If they try to claim I transferred anything, I want proof, dated and witnessed from this day forward." "I'll start tomorrow," Felix said. "Tonight," I corrected. "We start tonight." Felix nodded and opened his briefcase. I looked at the signature on that forged document, A man who'd sat at this exact table after Clara's funeral, who'd promised to protect what she left behind. They say your most dangerous enemy is the one who knows you best. That night I counted exactly 3 of them. Felix and I worked until 3 in the morning, photographing documents, creating notarized inventories, building a paper fortress around everything I owned. When he finally left through the kitchen door, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and waited for the next attack. It came at 6. The encrypted line on my flip phone rang at 6 in the morning, and Preston Padilla's voice carried a tension I'd never heard in 20 years of banking together. "Morris," he said, "I need you in my office. Now. Don't call ahead. Don't tell anyone you're coming." "What happened?" "Not over the phone," he said. 30 minutes. Use the rear entrance." The line went dead. I drove to Des Moines through the October dawn, the highway empty except for semis hauling grain. Preston managed the Des Moines Agricultural Bank, 55 years old, careful and methodical in a profession that rewarded both. I'd banked with him for 2 decades. He'd never used the encrypted line before. I parked behind the building and entered through the service door. Preston waited in the hallway, his tie already loosened despite the early hour. He didn't shake my hand. He just gestured toward the executive conference room and locked the door behind us. "Sit down," he said. I sat. Preston placed a manila folder on the polished table between us. His hands were shaking slightly. "I'm going to be completely transparent with you, Morris," he said. 3 weeks ago, your daughter came into this office. She wasn't looking for a mortgage. My chest went cold. She presented documentation, Preston continued. A certified clinical diagnosis stating you are suffering from advanced, rapidly deteriorating dementia. She attempted to invoke medical guardianship to seize total control of your accounts. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the table. "She argued you lack cognitive capacity to manage your own affairs," Preston said. "She had medical records, physician signatures, psychiatric evaluations, a complete dossier." "I've never been diagnosed with dementia," I said. My voice sounded distant. "I know," Preston said. "That's why I'm calling you. The documentation was professionally prepared, but something felt wrong. I requested independent verification before processing the guardianship petition. And the physician who signed the diagnosis doesn't exist. The medical license number is fake. The psychiatric evaluation was fabricated using stolen clinic letterhead." Preston opened the folder and slid it toward me. "She wasn't trying to steal your assets through documents, Morris. She was trying to legally execute your civil death." I looked at the papers. My name. A diagnosis of severe cognitive decline. Recommendations for immediate involuntary guardianship. My daughter's signature requesting emergency powers. Being declared legally insane is the ultimate theft. They don't just take your money, they take your right to argue you even exist. "The bank rejected it?" I asked. "Yes," Preston said. "And I kept the copies, against protocol, because I've known you for 20 years, and you're sharper at 70 than most men are at 40. "Thank you," I said. "I'll be taking those." Preston slid the folder across the table. "Morris, this isn't just fraud. This is systematic erasure. She's not waiting for you to sign documents. She's trying to make it legally impossible for you to refuse." I placed the folder in my briefcase with hands that refused to shake. "Did she say anything else when you rejected the petition?" "She said she'd be back with additional documentation," Preston said. "She said you were dangerous to yourself and others. She said she was protecting you." "Protecting me," I repeated. I told her the bank requires independent psychiatric evaluation before processing any guardianship claims. She left without another word. I stood. "Preston, if anyone asks whether I was here today—" "You weren't," he said. "And I never made this call." I drove home in silence. The October sun climbed higher, burning off the morning fog, revealing the corn stubble stretching to every horizon. Beautiful. Ordinary. Completely unchanged by the fact that my daughter had tried to erase my legal personhood 3 weeks ago. That evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table in complete silence. No television, no radio, just the single yellow bulb overhead and the sound of my own breathing. I pulled out my worn leather wallet to file a receipt. An old photograph slipped free and landed face up on the table. My daughter at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders in a golden cornfield. Her arms wrapped around my neck, her smile wide and genuine. I remembered the day. 1 week after Clara's funeral, Yasmin had cried herself to sleep every night, and I'd taken her to the back 40 to show her the corn Clara had loved. "Daddy, will the corn remember Mommy?" she'd asked. "The corn will grow every year because she loved it," I'd told her, "and we'll remember her together." I turned the photograph over. Messy childhood handwriting in faded blue ink. "Daddy is my whole world." I stared at those words for a long time. How does a child who wrote "Daddy is my whole world" become an adult who calculates the financial value of his death? I tried to find the structural link between that 8-year-old girl clinging to my neck and the 38-year-old woman who'd walked into a bank with fabricated dementia records. I searched for the moment of transformation, the precise instant when love turned to predation. There was no link, just empty space where a daughter used to be. The crushing weight of grief hit me like a physical force. My hand trembled. The photograph blurred. I stood abruptly and walked outside into the cool Iowa air. The October night stretched black and infinite overhead. I stood in the gravel drive until my breathing slowed, until the shaking stopped, until I could think clearly again. I went back inside, poured out the cold coffee, brewed a fresh pot, left the photograph face down on the table. No tears, no hesitation. I knew that photograph represented the daughter I'd raised, loved, sacrificed everything for. But tonight, standing in my dark kitchen, I didn't have the luxury of bleeding. Some wounds don't heal with time. They just grow sharper, cutting deeper into the bone. I picked up my phone and scrolled to the encrypted contact Felix had given me hours earlier. A private investigator. Someone who found things people wanted hidden. I pressed dial. The morning could wait. Tonight I needed to know exactly who my daughter had become. The encrypted logbook in my safe contained exactly 3 numbers I'd never committed to memory. And tonight I dialed the first one, the private investigator I'd hired 6 months before this war became visible. He answered on the second ring. "Graves," he said. "It's Morris Lockwood," I said. "You told me to call when I was ready for the full report." "Hold on." I heard a door close, footsteps, another door. "All right, secure line. The dossier is finalized, 300 pages. I sat at my desk, the safe door still open behind me, files spread across every surface. Give me the summary. Hugh Graves was 48 years old, a former federal investigator who'd gone private after a decade with the FBI. I'd found him through Felix's encrypted contacts. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge. He just found facts. "Your daughter is the apex predator here," Hugh said. His voice carried the flat, clinical tone of a man reading an autopsy report. "The husband is just an asset." "Explain." "Yasmin Travers knew about Marvin Travers's federal fraud conviction before she married him," Hugh said. "I pulled the court records. Securities fraud 2015, suspended sentence probation completed in 2018. They met in 2019, married in 2020. She married him after the conviction," I said. "She targeted him because of the conviction," Hugh corrected. "Marvin possessed the exact criminal skill set required to execute the asset-stripping scheme your daughter designed. She didn't want to dirty her hands with the technical fraud. She needed someone who already knew how." I closed my eyes, opened them. The desk looked the same. The world looked the same. Everything had changed. "What else?" "4 months ago, she hired a local surveillance firm to track your physical movements," Hugh said. "Grocery runs, bank visits, doctor appointments. They documented everything." "And you found this how?" "Because I've been tracking her for 6 months," Hugh said. She had no idea. For 6 months, my daughter thought she was hunting an oblivious old man. She didn't realize we were in the exact same woods, and I had already laid the traps. The dossier includes financial records, I asked. Bank statements, shell company registrations, property searches in California, communications with the corrupt attorney. Everything. California. She's been looking at beachfront properties in San Diego for 8 months, Hugh said. Price range 4 to 6 million. All inquiries made using projected liquid assets that match your estate value. She'd been shopping for houses with my money before she even asked for it. Deliver the hard copy to me tomorrow morning, I said. Do not engage anyone else. Do not discuss this with anyone. Understood, Hugh said. Morris, one more thing. The medical documents she presented to the bank. I traced the fabricated physician signatures. They were created using software Marvin purchased in July. This wasn't improvised. They've been building this infrastructure for months. Thank you, Hugh, I said. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., same entrance Preston used. I ended the call and sat in silence. My daughter hadn't fallen in love and been corrupted. She'd recruited a criminal specialist. She'd planned every move. She was the architect, not a victim. I didn't sleep that night. I read files until dawn, cross-referencing dates, building timelines, understanding exactly how long she'd been calculating my destruction. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with toast I didn't taste. The flip phone rang at noon. Unknown number, local area code. I answered carefully. Hello? Grandpa. A small voice. Hesitant. It's Otto. My chest went tight. Otto was 11 years old, my grandson, with his mother's dark hair and my late wife's gentle eyes. I hadn't heard his voice in months. Hey, kiddo, I said, softening my tone completely. How are you doing? I'm okay, he said. I'm calling from my room. Mom doesn't know. I miss the farm, Grandpa. I miss the fields and the barn and the tire swing. I miss having you here, I said. You can come visit any time, really. His voice lifted with hope, then fell. Mom says we're really busy right now. She says we have big things happening. What kind of big things? Well, Otto said the words tumbling out with a child's innocent enthusiasm. Mom said once the big paperwork clears, we're moving to a massive house right by the beach in California. It has a pool and everything. Grandpa, she showed us pictures. We'd have our own rooms, and there's a game room, and the ocean is right there. My hand tightened around the phone. That sounds exciting. Yeah, Mom says it's going to be perfect for our family. A fresh start, she called it. And what about me, kiddo? I asked gently. Would I get to visit you in California? Otto hesitated. I could hear him thinking, trying to remember exactly what he'd been told. Mom said you won't be able to come, he said finally. She said you have to go live in a special facility with people your own age where nurses look after you all day. She said you'd be much happier there because they have activities and bingo and stuff. She said it's like a resort, but with doctors. I looked out the kitchen window at the 400 acres stretching to the horizon. The fields where Otto used to run during summer breaks, chasing grasshoppers, climbing hay bales, learning to identify corn varieties by their leaves. Something inside me hardened into something completely unbreakable. Did she say when this would happen? I asked. My voice stayed calm, warm, grandfatherly. Soon, I think, Otto said. She talks about it with Dad a lot. She says once you sign the papers, everything will happen really fast. I see, I said. Otto, I want you to know something. No matter what happens, I love you and your sister very much. Okay, I love you too, Grandpa, he said. I gotta go. I hear Mom coming up the stairs. The line went dead. I set the phone on the table and stared at my untouched toast. My daughter had discussed my forced institutionalization in front of her children with the casual indifference of planning a weekend vacation. It wasn't a painful secret. It wasn't a difficult decision she wrestled with in private. It was a line item on a brochure. Grandpa goes to the facility. We get the beach house. The kids get a pool. Simple, clean, efficient. I looked down at my plate. and realized I wasn't hungry anymore. The pain was real, the image of those children being told their grandfather was being discarded like furniture. But the execution had to be flawless. Execution required evidence, documentation, proof that would stand up in court when the time came. I needed every piece of her conspiracy mapped and photographed before I made my first move. I hadn't stepped into my daughter's childhood bedroom in the West Wing for nearly a year, and the air still carried the faint scent of her expensive perfume mixed with something colder, ambition maybe, or calculation. Wednesday afternoon. The room looked exactly as she'd left it. Cream walls, queen bed with the floral quilt Clara had sewn, bookshelf holding her high school yearbooks and academic awards. The closet door stood half open. Felix needed historical tax documents from 2018 records I'd stored in labeled boxes on the top shelf of this closet. I pulled the step stool over and reached up. My hand brushed against something that wasn't a box, a leather journal wedged behind the files. It shifted, teetered, and fell. The journal hit the floor and sprawled open pages, splaying across the hardwood. I stepped down and looked at it. I didn't intend to invade her privacy, but my eyes caught handwritten text, neat and precise, dated 3 years ago. I picked it up. The entry was dated October 2020. 2 years after Clara's memorial service, the 10-year anniversary gathering we'd held in 2018. If Dad passes away before executing new estate structure, Iowa probate law guarantees me minimum of 50%. Brandon states this is baseline fallback position. I turned the page, no memories of her mother. No reflections on grief or family. Just a meticulously organized Excel spreadsheet replicated by hand in blue ink. Columns: fiscal year, father's age, estimated asset valuation, patent royalty projections, daughter's net take, rows calculations for each year from 2020 through 2030. If father dies this fiscal year, total asset valuation $11 million, daughter's net take $5.5 million minimum. If father dies next fiscal year, assets plus projected patent royalties, daughter's net take $6.2 million. Year after year. Each row calculating compound interest. Each column tracking appreciation. Each cell representing a version of my death that yielded her a different financial return. At the bottom of the page, a single note. Optimal timeline 2024 to 2025. Peak asset valuation before estate distribution triggers tax complications. I didn't shed a tear. I just looked at those neat rows of calculations and finally understood in her mind I wasn't her dad. I was just an asset waiting to be liquidated. She'd built a spreadsheet to determine the most profitable year for me to die. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I placed the journal back exactly where it had fallen, climbed the step stool, and returned it to its hiding place behind the tax files. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I felt nothing. I retrieved the documents Felix needed and walked out of that room. I locked the door behind me and didn't look back. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. I sat in my office with coffee I didn't drink, waiting for Hugh Graves to deliver the hard copy dossier. My phone buzzed at 8 a.m. Encrypted email from Hugh. Subject line: priority encrypted attachment. I opened it. The message was brief. Recovered these from archived server data. 5-year communication history. You need to read thread starting page 47. I downloaded the file to my secure local network and opened it. Emails between Yasmin and Marvin dating back 5 years. Before their marriage. Before they'd supposedly met. I scrolled to page 47. The thread was dated March 2018. Yasmin's email sent from a personal account I didn't recognize. I need to understand your operational background before we proceed. Have you executed this specific asset transfer structure in other jurisdictions? Marvin's reply: twice. Both times clean. No criminal exposure. Targets never realized until funds were already transferred and legal challenges became prohibitively expensive. Yasmin's response: good. My father will be a more resilient target. He's highly intelligent, financially sophisticated, and deeply cautious. But he loves me unconditionally. That love is the only operational vulnerability we need to exploit. I read that line twice. Then I read it again. My capacity to love her, the fundamental bond between parent and child, had been explicitly cataloged as their primary tactical entry point. Marvin's next email. Unconditional family trust is the most reliable vulnerability in financial fraud cases. Targets refuse to believe betrayal until evidence becomes overwhelming. By then, legal recourse is expensive and emotionally devastating. Yasmin. Exactly. We'll need at least 3 years to build the infrastructure without triggering suspicion. I'll maintain regular contact present as devoted daughter, ensure he never questions my intentions. 3 years. She'd written that in 2018. It was now 2023. She hadn't stumbled into this conspiracy. She hadn't been corrupted by Marvin's influence. She had recruited him. She had architected the entire operation, and she had specifically identified my love for her as the weapon that would destroy me. Some violations cut deeper than theft or fraud. Having your capacity to love weaponized against you is a wound that never closes. I scrolled further. More emails, financial projections, legal research about Iowa probate law, discussions about which attorney to compromise, calculations about my life expectancy based on family medical history. One email from Yasmin dated January 2019. Father's grandfather lived to 94. Father is currently 66, excellent health, no major medical conditions. We're looking at a potentially 20-year timeline if we rely on natural causes. That's unacceptable. The asset transfer approach is the only viable option. She'd researched how long I was likely to live and decided it was too long. I sat back in my chair. The office walls looked the same. The desk looked the same. The world looked the same. But I finally understood the complete truth. My daughter hadn't loved me and then stopped. She'd been planning this for at least 5 years, maybe longer. Every visit, every phone call, every "I love you, Dad" had been theater, performance, maintenance of the operational vulnerability they needed to exploit. The little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap reading picture books had never become the woman I thought she was. That transformation had happened years ago in silence and secret, while I'd believed we were still a family. I closed the laptop. I looked at Clara's portrait hanging on the office wall. Her calm face, her kind eyes. The woman who'd believed the best of everyone, who'd taught our daughter about love and trust and family. I whispered into the empty room. Thank God you didn't live long enough to read this email, Clara. Clara had been spared that pain. But I was still here alone, looking at evidence that proved my daughter had stopped being my daughter years before I'd noticed. The deeper revelations came faster after that. Felix Rawlings called at 3 in the afternoon, and the first words out of his mouth weren't a greeting. They were a warning. "Morris, we have a massive problem." I was in my office, the dossier spread across my desk. "Tell me." "I've been running a deep compliance sweep through commercial insurance clearinghouses," Felix said. His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. Urgency mixed with something darker. Fear, maybe. "Checking for any financial instruments tied to your name that you didn't authorize. And your daughter executed a $7 million key man life insurance policy on your life 5 months ago." The room went silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. "I never signed any life insurance application," I said. "I know," Felix said. "She used a forged digital signature." I pulled the original documents. The handwriting analysis software flagged it immediately. "The signature doesn't match your baseline biometric patterns." "It's a sophisticated forgery, but it's still a forgery." "Who's the beneficiary?" Felix paused. "A personal, irrevocable trust in your daughter's name. Sole beneficiary. The policy is structured so that if you die from any cause, natural, accidental, whatever, the full amount pays out directly to her trust. No probate, no delays. Just $7 million transferred within 30 days of death certification." I looked out the window at the fields. The October sun was already sinking toward the horizon. 5 months ago, I said quietly. May. Yes, that's when she stopped calling regularly, I said. That's when the visits became infrequent. She had everything in place by then. Morris, there's more, Felix said. Hugh sent me a file an hour ago. He scraped it from a hidden directory on your daughter's cloud drive. The file name is timeline_bf.xlsx. What does BF stand for? Felix didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was flat. I don't know. But the content is, Morris, this spreadsheet maps your precise recurring physical vulnerabilities. Explain. Exact wake-up times. Your morning routine. Medical appointment schedules with routes mapped. The fact that you drive a 1987 truck with no GPS, no OnStar, no tracking systems. The specific gravel roads you take to avoid highway traffic. The sections of those roads with zero cellular reception. I said nothing. Morris, this file documents every moment you're isolated and unobserved. It catalogs when you're most vulnerable to an incident that wouldn't raise questions. There's a line that separates financial fraud from something darker when someone starts mapping your daily routine, calculating when you're most isolated. That line has been crossed. Send me the file, I said. I already did. Encrypted. Check your secure email. I opened my laptop with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. The email was there. I downloaded the attachment. The spreadsheet opened. Columns, day of week. Time. Activity. Location. Cellular coverage Y/N. Witnesses Y/N. Vehicle type. Vulnerability rating 1 to 10. Rows upon rows of my life cataloged like inventory. Monday 5:30 a.m. wake up. Brew coffee. Location farmhouse kitchen. Cellular yes. Witnesses number vulnerability 3. Tuesday 7:15 a.m. Drive to feed store. Route County Road 47, 12 miles, 8 miles, no cell service. Vehicle 1987, Ford pickup, no safety systems. Witnesses, number of vulnerability 9. Wednesday, 2 p.m., medical checkup. Route Highway 30 to Des Moines, return via back roads. Cellular coverage intermittent. Vulnerability 7. Thursday morning, inspect South 40 acres walk perimeter alone. Location isolated. Witnesses number vulnerability 8. Every drive, every walk, every moment I was alone and unreachable. The file had been updated as recently as 2 weeks ago. I scrolled to the bottom. A notes section. Subject maintains highly predictable routine. Tuesday morning drive represents highest vulnerability, window isolated road. No witnesses, no cellular coverage. Notes indicated preferred conditions and estimated timeline for incident to avoid suspicion. I stared at those words. Subject. Not father, not dad. Subject. Optimal window. Ruled accidental. Felix, I said. My voice sounded distant. How many Tuesdays have passed since she created this file? 16, Felix said quietly. And I drive to the feed store every Tuesday, I said. Same route, same time, same truck. I know. Why didn't they? I stopped. They were waiting for the right weather, the right conditions. They needed it to look completely natural. Yes, I remembered Tuesday mornings. The long drive down County Road 47. The sections where my phone lost signal completely. The steep embankment where the road curved near Miller's Creek. I remembered headlights in my rearview mirror sometimes. A dark sedan always staying half a mile back. I'd assumed it was another farmer heading to town. I stared at the long empty road leading to my property and realized how close I had been to a fatal accident. Morris, you need to change your routine immediately, Felix said. No predictable patterns, no isolated drives, no. I understand, I said. Do you want police protection? I can make calls. This crosses the line from fraud to conspiracy to commit. No police, I said. Not yet. If we bring authorities in now, they'll destroy evidence. They'll scatter. I need everything documented first. Every piece of the conspiracy mapped and preserved. Then you need private security, Felix said. Someone with you at all times. I'll call Hugh, I said. He can arrange it. Morris, I need you to take this seriously. Your daughter has a $7 million incentive for you to die, and she's been tracking your movements for months. This isn't theoretical anymore. This is active threat assessment. I know, I said. Felix, thank you for everything, for finding this, for keeping me alive. Just stay alive, Felix said. That's all I ask. I ended the call and sat in the silent office. The October sun was setting. The fields turned gold, then amber, then shadow. I thought about Tuesday mornings, about the curve near Miller's Creek, about how easy it would be for an old truck to lose control on wet gravel, slide down the embankment, and disappear into the water. No witnesses, no cell service, just an old man who drove too fast on a dangerous road. I picked up the phone, dialed Hugh Graves, and said 5 words that changed everything about how I moved through the world. I don't drive alone anymore. You know exactly why. Hugh Graves arrived within 2 hours. He didn't ask questions. He just parked an unmarked sedan behind the barn and moved into the farmhouse guest room with a duffel bag and a sidearm. I wasn't driving alone anymore. I wasn't living alone anymore either. When Marvin Travers pulled up to my farmhouse on Friday morning, alone without my daughter wearing a calculated professional smile, I knew he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. I watched him from the kitchen window. His car was a black Audi, expensive and carefully maintained. He parked in the circular drive, checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, and climbed out, wearing pressed khakis and a button-down shirt. Business casual. Professional. He knocked on the front door. 3 calm, measured knocks. I opened it and smiled. "Marvin, this is a surprise." "Morris," he said, extending his hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was hoping we could have a private conversation, man to man." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, practiced. "Of course. Come in. Can I offer you some tea?" "That would be wonderful," he said. I led him to the kitchen and put the kettle on. Marvin sat at the oak table, the same table where he and my daughter had demanded I sign away everything I owned. He looked relaxed, confident. I poured 2 mugs of tea and set one in front of him. Then I sat across from him and waited. "Morris, I have immense professional respect for you," Marvin began. His voice was smooth, reasonable. "You've built something impressive here. The farm, the patents, the commercial properties. You're a smart man." "Thank you," I said. "So let's cut the theater," Marvin said. "You and I both know what's happening here. Yasmin made her request. You refused. Now we're at an impasse." I sipped my tea and said nothing. "I'm here to offer you a civilized exit strategy," Marvin continued. "A way for everyone to walk away clean." "I'm listening," I said. Marvin leaned forward. "You wire me $400,000 cash directly to an account I'll specify. In exchange, I divorce Yasmin, sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and vanish from your lives forever. You get your daughter back. I get compensation for my time. Everyone wins." I looked at him. "You're offering to abandon your wife for $400,000. "I'm offering you a solution," Marvin said. "Yasmin is complicated, high maintenance. If I'm being honest, this marriage has been more of a business arrangement than a love story. You give me my exit package, I disappear, and you can rebuild your relationship with your daughter without my interference." My son-in-law thought he was an extortionist, making a calculated business proposal. He didn't realize he was just a voice recording waiting to be filed with federal prosecutors. "And if I refuse?" I asked calmly. Marvin's expression hardened slightly. "Then things become less civilized. I have copies of the medical documentation Yasmin prepared, the dementia diagnosis, the psychiatric evaluations, all professionally formatted. Forged documents," I said. "Documents that would raise serious questions about your cognitive capacity," Marvin corrected. "And I know about your pending deal with Midwest Agritech Corp., the contract you haven't publicly disclosed yet, the one worth $28 million in royalty expansion." My chest went cold. That contract was confidential. Negotiations had been conducted through encrypted channels with only 3 people present: myself, Felix, and the Agrochem Corporate Counsel. "How do you know about that?" I asked quietly. "I make it my business to know things," Marvin said. "And if you refuse my very reasonable offer, I will personally contact the Midwest Agritech Board of Directors. I will inform them that you are experiencing severe cognitive decline. I will provide them with medical documentation proving you lack the legal capacity to sign binding contracts. I have the signatures, Morris. I can tank your deal." He took a sip of tea, completely relaxed. "The board will demand independent psychiatric evaluation," he continued. "The evaluation will take weeks, maybe months. By then, their fiscal year will have closed. They'll move on to other licensing opportunities. Your $28 million contract will evaporate, and you'll be left fighting a protracted legal battle to prove your own sanity." He set his mug down carefully. "Or," he said, "you wire me $400,000 and this all goes away. Clean, simple, professional." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I nodded slowly. "Give me 72 hours to structure the liquidity," I said. $400,000 in cash isn't something I can pull from a checking account. I'll need to liquidate some securities, arrange the wire transfer through my attorney." Marvin smiled. 72 hours. I can work with that." He stood and extended his hand again. "I'm glad we could come to an understanding, Morris. This is better for everyone." I shook his hand. "I'll be in touch." I walked him to the door. He climbed into his Audi, gave me a casual wave, and drove away down the gravel drive. I watched until his taillights disappeared. Then I closed the door, locked it, and walked back to the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, the air in this house felt clean, not because the predator had left, but because the trap had been sprung. I reached under the lip of the oak table and detached the small digital recording device I'd mounted there 2 days ago. High-gain microphone, military-grade encryption, 8 hours of battery life. I plugged it into my laptop and reviewed the audio file. Every word was crystal clear. The extortion demand. The threat to tank the corporate contract. The explicit quid pro quo. In the state of Iowa, recording a conversation is fully admissible under one-party consent statute. Iowa Code Section 808A.2. As long as one party to the conversation consents to the recording, and I certainly consented, the evidence is legally sound. I encrypted the file with Felix's secure protocol and attached it to an email addressed to the FBI contact he'd provided 3 days ago, a federal prosecutor in Des Moines who specialized in wire fraud and extortion cases. Subject line: evidence of interstate extortion and conspiracy to commit fraud. Message body: attached is a legally obtained audio recording of Marvin Travers' DOB August 14, 1981, explicitly demanding $400,000 in exchange for divorce and threatening to sabotage a multi-million-dollar business contract using fabricated medical documents. Ready for deployment at your discretion. I hit send. The file uploaded. The email transmitted. Somewhere in a federal office building in Des Moines, an encrypted message landed in a secure inbox. I held my phone and allowed myself the smallest, coldest smile. My son-in-law thought he was an extortionist. He didn't realize he was just a voice recording on a federal server. The file was transmitted. The evidence was logged. Now came the hard work, the systematic dismantling of every financial lifeline my daughter had wrapped around my assets like a parasite. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear, and I drove into Des Moines before sunrise, knowing that by the time the sun set tonight, my daughter's world would be unrecognizable. Hugh drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the October dawn break over the Iowa cornfields. The sky turned from black to gray to pale gold. Beautiful, indifferent. The land didn't care about fraud or betrayal. It just existed. We reached the Des Moines Agricultural Bank at 7:30. Preston was already waiting in his office door, unlocked coffee brewing. "Morris," he said, "what do you need?" I sat across from him and placed a leather folder on his desk. I need to revoke every single power of attorney I ever gave my daughter, effective immediately. Preston opened the folder and began reading. His expression didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. Under Iowa Code Section 633B, a principal may revoke a power of attorney at any time, I said. I'm exercising that right. Every authorization, every signature privilege, every account access, revoked. Understood, Preston said. He pulled up account records on his computer and began typing. This will require updating every account in the system, checking savings investment portfolios, business accounts. All of them, I said. It'll take about an hour to process completely, Preston said. We'll also need to update your biometric security protocols. If she had any secondary access through fingerprint or voice authentication, replace everything, I said. New fingerprint scan, new retinal scan, new voice pattern authentication. I want every biometric marker reset to my data only. Preston nodded and stood. Follow me to the secure authentication suite. We spent 40 minutes in a small room with scanning equipment. My fingerprints, my retina, my voice recording security phrases. The system erased my daughter's biometric signatures and replaced them with fresh scans that only I controlled. Back in Preston's office, I handed him a second document. These are all the secondary corporate cards issued in her name, I said. Lock them immediately. Preston reviewed the list. All 6 cards, all 6. He typed commands. On his screen, I watched the status indicators change from active to suspended. Now the automated transfers, I said. Preston pulled up the recurring payment schedule. I looked at the list and felt something cold settle in my chest. Luxury apartment rent in downtown Des Moines, $3,200 per month. Automatically transferred on the 1st. Lease payment for a BMW X5, $890 per month. Revolving credit line for personal expenses, $5,000 monthly limit, automatically replenished. Gym membership, spa membership, country club dues, wine club subscription. Preston looked at me across that polished desk, and I saw something shift in his eyes. He wasn't just processing transactions anymore. He was witnessing a man reclaim his life. Terminate all of them, I said. Effective immediately. No grace period. No warnings. Morris, this will shut down her lifestyle completely, Preston said quietly. The rent payment is due in 3 days. If it doesn't clear, then she'll need to find another way to pay for it, I said. These transfers are done. Preston clicked through screens. One by one, the automated payments changed status, canceled. Over $9,000 per month in subsidies. Gone. Is there anything else? Preston asked. That's everything for today, I said. Thank you, Preston, for all of this. He shook my hand. His grip was firm. Morris, I don't know what your daughter did to you, but whatever it was, I'm sorry. I nodded and walked out. Hugh drove us to a hardware store 40 miles out of town, a place where nobody knew my face or my family. I walked the aisles like a man shopping for supplies after a storm. 3 commercial-grade deadbolts, heavy steel, pick-resistant cylinders, 1 closed-circuit security camera system, 8 cameras, 30-day cloud backup, night vision, motion detection, wiring, mounting brackets, weatherproof housings. The cashier rang up the purchase without comment. Just another farmer securing his property. We drove home in silence. That afternoon, I installed the locks myself. Hugh offered to help, but I waved him off. I needed to do this with my own hands. Front door, back door, office door. Every deadbolt I installed was a punctuation mark, a period at the end of a sentence I'd been forced to read for far too long. The old locks came off easily. The new ones required drilling, precise measurement, careful alignment. I worked slowly, methodically. My hands remembered this kind of labor from 40 years of farm maintenance. Each bolt slid into place with a heavy, satisfying click. Solid, permanent, unbreakable. Evening came. I mounted the security cameras under the eaves, positioning them to cover every approach to the house. Driveway, front porch, back entrance, barn. The angles overlapped, eliminating blind spots. I ran the wiring through the attic, connected everything to the central hub in my office, and powered the system on. 8 screens flickered to life on my computer monitor. 8 different views of my property recording, continuously uploading encrypted backups to a secure server every 6 hours. No one would approach this house again without me knowing. I sat at my desk as darkness settled over the fields. Hugh was downstairs making dinner. The house smelled like coffee and something cooking on the stove. Normal. Safe. I looked at the list I'd written yesterday. 11 actions total, 4 completed today. 1 revoke all power of attorney. Done. 2 update biometric security. Done. 3 terminate automated transfers. Done. 4 install physical security. Done. 7 actions remained. And somewhere in downtown Des Moines, in a luxury apartment paid for with my money, my daughter was sitting on furniture I'd purchased, drinking wine from a club membership I'd funded, waiting for a wire transfer that would never arrive. Her credit cards would start declining in 48 hours. Her rent check would bounce on Tuesday. Her car lease payment would fail on the 15th. Every single financial pipe had been capped. I stood in my newly secured farmhouse as darkness settled over the Iowa fields and counted on my calloused fingers 4 actions complete, 7 remaining. And somewhere in the city, my daughter was sitting in her apartment, waiting for her wire transfer, completely unaware that every single pipe had just been capped. 7 actions remained. Sunday would erase 5 of them. By Monday morning, only 2 cards would be left to play, and those would be the ones that destroyed her completely. Sunday morning, I sat across from Felix Rawlings in his law office, a fountain pen in my hand, and a document that would erase my daughter from my legacy completely. The revised last will and testament sat on the polished mahogany desk between us. 43 pages, every clause reviewed, every contingency addressed, every loophole sealed. Read the disinheritance clause one more time, I said. Felix turned to page 7 and read aloud. I, Morris Lockwood, being of sound mind and disposing memory, do hereby explicitly disinherit my daughter Yasmin Travers née Lockwood. She shall receive $0 from my estate. This disinheritance is intentional, not the result of oversight or accident. He looked up. The $0 non-contestability clause means if she challenges this will, she receives absolutely nothing, not even a token dollar. If she accepts the disinheritance quietly, she gets 0. If she fights it in probate court, she still gets 0. Either way, she walks away with nothing. And the estate itself, redirected in its entirety to the Clara Hayes Memorial Agricultural Scholarship Fund, Felix said. Perpetual endowment, managed by an independent board. Funds distributed annually to Iowa farm families pursuing agricultural education. Your daughter will have no access, no control, no legal standing. Over $11 million, everything I'd built across 70 years flowing to strangers who would never know my name. Farm kids who needed help. Not the daughter who'd calculated the financial value of my death. Where do I sign? I asked. Felix placed the document in front of me and indicated 7 signature lines. I signed each one with my full legal name. Witnessed, notarized, legally bulletproof. This is now your active will, Felix said. I'll file it with the county clerk tomorrow morning. Morris, you understand what this means if something happens to you. My daughter gets nothing, I said. I understand perfectly. Felix placed the executed will in his office safe. What's next on your list? The bar complaint, I said. I handed him a manila envelope. Inside, the forged deed of transfer, the fabricated dementia diagnosis, the fraudulent guardianship petition. All signed by Gerald Whitmore, my former family attorney. I'm filing formal misconduct charges with the Iowa State Bar Association, I said. Collusion and document forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, conspiracy to commit fraud. I want his license suspended pending investigation. Felix reviewed the evidence. This is career-ending Morris. He'll never practice law again. Good, I said. The systematic dismantling of her life wasn't cruelty. It was mathematics, the simple equation of consequence, meeting action after 3 years of calculated conspiracy. Felix prepared the bar complaint on his office computer. I reviewed it, approved the language, and signed. He transmitted it electronically to the State Bar Disciplinary Board, with all supporting evidence attached. "They'll open an investigation within 72 hours, Felix said. "Once they see forged signatures and fabricated medical records, Whitmore is done. Action 6 complete." I left Felix's office at noon and drove to the upscale organic market on the west side of Disowned, the place where my daughter bought her specialty groceries, her imported wines, her artisanal cheeses, all charged to a corporate account in my name. I found the manager in his office behind the customer service desk. Glenn Harmon was a professional man in his 50s who recognized me immediately. "Mr. Lockwood," he said, standing. "Is there a problem with your account?" "There will be," I said. "I'm here to terminate all credit privileges for Yasmin Travers. From this moment forward, she pays cash." Glenn pulled up the account on his computer. "Mr. Lockwood, she has quite a substantial balance on the corporate line. Over $4,000 in charges from the past 3 months. Send me the final bill," I said. "I'll settle what's owed. But no more charges. If she wants groceries from this store, she brings her own money." "Understood," Glenn said. He typed quickly. "The account is now marked cash only. She'll be notified at point of sale. Action 7 complete." I returned to the farmhouse and spent the afternoon on 2 final administrative tasks. First, I drafted a formal fraud notification letter to Preston at the Disowned Agricultural Bank, documenting the forged guardianship, attempt the fabricated medical records, and the attempted seizure of account control. Official record. Paper trail. Legal documentation that would be discoverable in any future litigation. I printed it on my office letterhead, signed it, and mailed it certified with return receipt requested. Action 8 complete. Second, I called the bonded legal courier service Felix had recommended, a specialized firm that handled sensitive document transfers with full chain of custody protocols. "I need to deliver a package to the FBI field office in Des Moines," I said. "High security materials, signature required." The courier arrived at 4 p.m. I handed him a sealed courier envelope containing Hugh Graves's 300-page investigative dossier and the audio recording of Marvin's extortion attempt, addressed to Special Agent Sarah Mackenzie, FBI Field Office, Des Moines. Subject line: "Evidence of interstate wire fraud, extortion, and conspiracy to commit identity theft." The courier logged the package, had me sign the transfer manifest, and placed it in a locked security case. "This will be delivered first thing Monday morning," he said. "Signature required from the receiving agent." Action 9 complete. 5 moves in 1 day, each one a surgical incision. Precise and irreversible. The kind of cuts that don't bleed immediately, but leave scars that never fade. I stood in my kitchen that evening and opened my leather notebook. The checklist I'd written 3 days ago, before any of this became visible. 9 actions executed in 48 hours. 2 remaining. And those last 2 cards weren't just about stopping her, they would bury her completely. Action 10 would happen Monday morning. The secure video conference with Midwest Agritech Corporation. The contract Yasmin didn't know existed. Action 11 would follow immediately after. The final move. The one that would demonstrate exactly how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered her. I closed the notebook and looked out at the dark fields. Somewhere in Disowned, my daughter was probably checking her credit cards, finding them declined. Calling the market, learning her account was frozen. Wondering why her rent payment hadn't cleared. Confusion would turn to panic by tomorrow. Panic would turn to rage by Tuesday. But by then, the federal investigation would already be underway. I stood in my kitchen and allowed myself the smallest, coldest satisfaction. 9 actions complete. 2 devastating cards remaining. And the 72 hours were almost up. The final 2 cards weren't just moves, they were checkmate. One would secure my future. The other would ensure she had none. Monday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes when you know exactly what you're about to do and exactly who is about to lose everything. I drove to Felix's law office before dawn. Hugh followed in the unmarked sedan, a shadow I'd grown accustomed to. The streets were empty. The sky was the color of steel. Felix had everything prepared when I arrived. His conference room had been converted into a secure communications center. Laptop, high-definition camera, encrypted video software, 2 leather chairs positioned in front of a neutral background. "The connection is live," Felix said. "Desmond is waiting on the other end. Are you ready?" I sat in the leather chair and adjusted my tie. "Let's finish this." Felix initiated the video call. The screen flickered, and Desmond Sinclair appeared, CEO of Midwest Agritech Corp., 58 years old, silver hair, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses. I'd met him twice before during preliminary negotiations. A serious man who didn't waste time. "Morris," Desmond said. "Good to see you. Felix has briefed me on the complications that have arisen. Thank you for your patience," I said. "Before we proceed, I want to address those complications directly." I held up a document to the camera. Official letterhead from Iowa Health System. Stamped, notarized, dated yesterday. "This is a comprehensive cognitive assessment performed by Dr. Helena Marshall, Chief of Neurology at Iowa Health," I said. "It certifies my complete mental competence, legal capacity, and sound decision-making ability. The evaluation was conducted yesterday specifically to counter fraudulent medical filings that may have come to your attention." Desmond leaned forward, reading the document through the screen. "Our compliance team flagged those fraudulent filings 3 weeks ago, Morris. We dismissed them immediately. The signatures were obviously forged and the medical license numbers didn't exist. We knew someone was trying to sabotage this deal. The blackmail leverage Marvin had threatened me with, the weapon he'd believed would tank this contract, had been identified and discarded weeks ago." "I appreciate your due diligence," I said. "We stand fully behind this partnership," Desmond said. "Your patents represent breakthrough technology. The drought-resistant corn strains you've developed could transform Midwestern agriculture. We're committed to this licensing agreement." Felix slid the contract across the conference table toward me. 47 pages. Every clause negotiated. Every term finalized. "Before I tell you what that contract was worth, if you're still with me through this comment. A, if you think she'll figure it out before the FBI arrives. Or B, if you think she'll be blindsided completely, and tell me in 5 to 10 words why." Quick note: what follows includes some recreated details for storytelling impact. The lesson is what matters. I picked up my fountain pen, the same pen my grandfather had used to sign the deed to this farm in 1952. The weight of it felt right in my hand. The contract specified exclusive regional licensing for 3 agricultural patents: drought-resistant seed coating technology, water-efficient germination protocols, and adaptive soil nutrition systems. Midwest Agritech would manufacture and distribute across 17 states. I would receive ongoing royalties calculated as a percentage of gross sales. Total contract value $28 million over 7 years. The largest agricultural intellectual property deal in Iowa history. My daughter demanded $700,000, like it was a king's ransom. She had no idea I was about to sign a contract 40 times larger than her greed could even imagine. I pressed the pen to the signature line. The ink flowed smooth and black. My legal name in cursive script, the same signature I'd practiced as a boy copying my father's hand. "Congratulations, Morris," Desmond said through the screen. "This partnership will benefit a lot of farm families." "That's the intention," I said. Felix countersigned as witness. The contract was executed. Legal, binding, complete. Action 10 complete. The video call ended. Felix closed his laptop and looked at me with something that might have been respect or might have been relief. $28 million, he said quietly. "And she has no idea. She knows about a $700,000 demand." I said. She's been waiting 72 hours for that wire transfer. She's probably checking her bank account every 5 minutes, wondering why the money hasn't arrived. I looked at my watch, 10:15 a.m. Somewhere in downtown Des Moines, my daughter was sitting in a luxury cafe she could no longer afford, drinking a $12 latte charged to a credit card that would decline in 6 hours, waiting for money that would never arrive. She had no idea that while she waited for scraps, I'd just signed away millions, and not a single cent would ever enter her ecosystem. Every dollar from that contract was already allocated. The scholarship fund, the farm's operational endowment, the legal defense fund I'd established for other elderly victims of financial fraud. She would get nothing. Not today, not ever. "What's Action 11?" Felix asked. I smiled. "Patience. The 11th action isn't something I execute. It's something I let happen." I closed my fountain pen, poured a fresh cup of tea from Felix's office pot, and waited for gravity to do the rest, because when you cut every rope, the fall is inevitable. My phone sat silent on the conference table. No missed calls. No frantic texts. The deadline Marvin had set, 72 hours to wire $400,000, had officially expired. They didn't know yet. They were still operating under the assumption that I was the vulnerable one, the confused old man, the target, the mark. They had no idea the federal investigation was already underway. They had no idea their financial lifelines had been severed. They had no idea about the will, the bar complaint, the evidence courier, the cognitive assessment, or the $28 million contract. They were still playing a game I'd already won. I looked at my signature on that corporate parchment and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not victory exactly, but completion. 11 actions in 72 hours. The board was completely clear. Now I just had to wait for gravity to do the rest. Gravity doesn't hurry. It doesn't announce itself. It just pulls steady and inevitable until the thing that was suspended finally hits the ground. The flip phone had been vibrating against the stone bench in my garden since 10 in the morning, and I had not looked at it once. I sat in the October afternoon watching the distant horizon where my 400 acres met the sky. The corn stubble caught the light. The wind moved through it like breathing. Clara used to walk these fields with a book under her arm, finding places to sit and read where the world felt big and quiet. The phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I let it buzz. At exactly 3 o'clock, the precise hour Marvin had set as his deadline for the wire transfer, I picked up the phone and opened it. 98 missed calls. I scrolled through this call log, all from the same number. My daughter's cell phone, starting at 10:15 this morning, accelerating through the afternoon. 14 calls in the last hour alone. I opened the text messages. The progression read like a psychological autopsy. 10:30 a.m. Answer your phone. This isn't a game. 11 a.m. You're making a massive mistake. Call me immediately. 11:45 a.m. Dad, I'm serious. You don't understand what you're doing. Noon. Fine, you want to play hardball? My attorney is filing emergency motions tomorrow. 12:30 p.m. We can work this out. Let's meet face to face. I'll come to the farm. 1 p.m. Please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. 1:45 p.m. My rent check bounced. My credit cards are declining. What did you do? 2:15 p.m. Are you seriously going to let your own daughter end up on the street? 2:30 p.m. I have children, Dad. Your grandchildren. You're going to do this to them. 2:45 p.m. Fine. You want me to beg? I'm begging. Please, just talk to me. 2:55 p.m. You selfish bastard. You'll regret this for the rest of your miserable life. 3 p.m. Nothing. Silence. She'd tried every single key in her emotional manipulation ring. Threats, negotiation, guilt, rage, desperation, maternal appeal. Not one fit the lock. Some people believe they are so immensely intelligent that the rules of gravity don't apply to them. That belief is always the first brick in their prison cell. I selected reply. I typed exactly 2 words too late. Sent. Then I powered down the phone completely, walked inside and tucked it in the hallway drawer, where I kept old mail and forgotten keys. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving. A Cabernet Clara and I had bought on our 30th anniversary. I poured a glass and carried it back to the stone bench. The Iowa sky turned deep violet as the sun sank toward the horizon. Beautiful, clean, indifferent. The phone in the house rang at 4 o'clock. The landline. I walked inside and answered. Mr. Lockwood. A male voice. Professional. Clipped. The flat authority of federal law enforcement. Speaking, I said. This is Special Agent Marcus Holland, FBI Des Moines Field Office. I'm calling to inform you that we have successfully interdicted and detained Marvin Travers at Des Moines International Airport at 3:47 p.m. this afternoon. I sat in the kitchen chair. Go on. Mr. Travers was attempting to board a direct flight to Guadalajara, Mexico, the agent continued. During security screening, TSA flagged anomalies in his luggage. We were already monitoring him based on the evidence package you submitted through Legal Courier on Sunday. What did you find? 2 counterfeit passports under assumed names. $180,000 in cash bundled and hidden in a false bottom carry-on. A forged deed of transfer document with your signature. And a handwritten file labeled timeline_bf.xlsx, a detailed surveillance log, tracking your daily movements, vulnerable locations, and optimal windows for what appears to be planned physical intervention. I closed my eyes. The timeline file. The document mapping when I was most isolated, when accidents could be staged. But the piece of evidence that solidifies our case, Agent Holland said, was found on his cell phone. A text message from your daughter sent this morning at 9 a.m. What did it say? The agent read it verbatim. If Plan B is required, execute it before you clear customs. I need the Midwest Agritech contract legally voided due to his sudden incapacity. No delays. The room went very quiet. Mr. Lockwood, that text message explicitly orders a criminal act to be executed on foreign soil to circumvent U.S. jurisdiction, the agent said. It references the corporate contract you signed this morning, information that wasn't public. It discusses voiding that contract through rendering you incapacitated. This is documented conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, and potentially conspiracy to commit assault or worse. She wrote that from her personal phone, I said. Yes, Agent Holland said. People consistently underestimate digital evidence trails. She created a permanent federal record of criminal intent. What happens now? Mr. Travers is in federal custody. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning on multiple charges, including attempted flight to avoid prosecution, wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Your daughter will be served with a federal indictment within 72 hours. We're coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Given the documented evidence, the forged documents, the extortion, recording the surveillance files, and now this text message, the case is exceptionally strong. How long are we talking about? I asked. For Mr. Travers, 10 to 15 years federal prison is the likely range. For your daughter, 8 to 12 years, depending on plea negotiations. These are federal charges, Mr. Lockwood. There's no parole in the federal system. They serve a minimum of 85% of the sentence. I looked out the kitchen window at the darkening fields. Thank you for the update, Agent Holland, I said. You did the right thing bringing this to us, he said. A lot of elderly victims don't have the resources or the courage to fight back. You've potentially prevented similar schemes from being executed against other families. I ended the call and sat in the silent kitchen. I sat on that stone bench watching the distant cornfields and felt no celebration, no vindication, just the wind in the crops and the clean silence of a closed chapter. I thanked the agent, ended the call, and looked out at the land where my wife used to walk, where my daughter had once played. 2 words. No explanations. No dramatic confrontation. That was the absolute entirety of what I owed her. But I was wrong about owing her nothing more. She would come to collect one final time, not money, not explanations, but a confrontation. I would deny her even that. The sound of screaming brakes tearing through the evening stillness told me everything I needed to know. My daughter had finally arrived at the gate. I was sitting on my front porch in the wicker chair Clara and I had bought 30 years ago, a warm mug of tea resting in my palms. The October night had settled cold and clear. The stars were visible. The fields stretched dark and quiet in every direction. The headlights cut through the darkness first. Then the engine roar. Then the violent screech of tires on gravel as a vehicle skidded to a stop at the perimeter gate. The car door slammed open. I heard footsteps running. Then the metallic crash of fists hammering against wrought iron. "Dad!" My daughter's voice tore through the night. Raw, desperate, furious. "Dad, open this gate." I took a slow sip of tea and didn't move. The heavy wrought iron gate I'd installed on Saturday stood firm. Electronic locks, commercial grade. The kind used for industrial facilities, not family farms. Yasmin grabbed the bars and shook them with everything she had. The gate rattled but didn't budge. "Are you out of your mind?" she screamed. "You can't do this to me. Do you hear me? You can't do this." I set my mug on the small table beside the chair and reached for the external intercom control. I'd installed the system alongside the gate. 8 cameras, voice amplification, full perimeter coverage. I pressed the button. My voice came through the speaker mounted on the gate post. Flat, amplified, emotionless. "You told me explicitly that I was no longer your father," I said. "You called me a useless old wallet. Strangers do not have access to my land." There was a moment of a silence. Then her voice came back different now. Higher, panicked. "Dad, please. My credit cards are all frozen. My rent check bounced. The bank won't talk to me." "What did you do?" "I revoked your access to my assets," I said through the intercom, "as is my legal right." "You're going to let your own daughter end up on the street," she screamed. "Do you want to see me homeless? Is that what you want?" I watched her through the darkness. 50 feet separated us, but it might as well have been 50 miles. "I offered you $700,000, she said, her voice breaking. "That was a reasonable request. You have 11 million. You could have helped me." "You offered to steal everything I own," I said calmly. "The document you brought me wasn't a loan request. It was a total asset transfer. And when that failed, you tried to have me declared legally incompetent using fabricated medical records." She froze. Even from 50 feet away, I saw her body go rigid. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Yes, you do," I said, "and so does the FBI." She grabbed the gate bars again and tried to climb. Her high heels slipped on the metal. She lost her grip and fell backward, hitting the gravel road hard. She scrambled to her feet, her expensive clothes covered in dust, and started screaming again, louder this time, hysterical. "You call yourself a father. You're supposed to protect me. You're supposed to take care of your family." I watched the taillights of a vehicle appear in the distance down the long gravel road and felt no triumph, no vindication, just the profound relief of a man who'd finally locked the door on a decades-long invasion. "I protected you for 38 years, I said through the intercom. "I paid for your education, your wedding, your house, your car, your lifestyle. And you repaid me by mapping the optimal conditions for staging my accidental death." She went completely still. The vehicle's headlights grew brighter. Right on cue, the private security car pulled up behind my daughter's vehicle and stopped. 2 uniformed officers stepped out. Professional, calm, unyielding. I'd contracted the security company on Saturday afternoon, the same day I installed the gate. I'd given them explicit instructions: if anyone attempts to breach the perimeter between dusk and dawn, respond immediately. Treat the property as a private agricultural research facility. No exceptions. "Ma'am," the first officer said, approaching Yasmin with his hand resting on his radio. You are trespassing on a private agricultural research facility. You need to step away from the perimeter immediately. Yasmin spun toward them. This is my father's farm. I grew up here. You can't kick me out. Ma'am, the property owner has filed formal trespassing restrictions, the second officer said. You are not authorized to be on this property. You need to return to your vehicle and leave the area. Dad! Yasmin screamed past the officers, looking directly at me on the porch. Tell them I'm allowed here. I looked at her through the darkness. My only child. The little girl who used to sit on my shoulders in the cornfields. The woman who'd calculated the financial value of my death. She wanted a dramatic confrontation, tears and shouting and theatrical forgiveness. I gave her a locked gate and a cold intercom voice because that was the only language she'd earned. I said nothing. Sir, the first officer called toward the porch. Do you want to authorize this individual? No, I said. My voice carried across the 50 feet. Clear. Final. She is not authorized. Please escort her off the property. Yasmin's face crumpled. For just a moment I saw something that might have been genuine pain. Then it hardened into rage. You'll regret this, she said. Her voice was cold now, venomous. You're going to die alone in that house with no one who gives a damn about you. I've been alone for a long time, I said quietly. I just didn't realize it until recently. The officers guided her back to her vehicle. She went without physical resistance, but her voice carried across the night air threats, curses, promises of legal action, declarations of my cruelty. She climbed into her car. The engine started. The headlights swung around. The security vehicle followed her down the gravel road, maintaining a professional distance until she turned onto the highway. I watched the taillights of the security vehicle disappear down the long gravel road, and the night settled back over my 400 acres like a blanket. For the first time all autumn, I could hear the crickets in the fields. It was quiet. It was finally quiet. The quiet lasted through the night. I slept better than I had in months. When I woke at 5 in the morning, the house felt different, lighter, like something heavy had finally been removed from the foundation. Dawn broke over the Iowa cornfields on Tuesday morning, and my phone rang at exactly 6 with the kind of call that closes chapters permanently. I was already dressed, brewing coffee in the kitchen when the landline rang. I recognized the number. FBI Des Moines Field Office. Mr. Lockwood, Agent Holland said. I'm calling with an official update before the press release goes live this afternoon. Go ahead, I said. Our forensic accounting and digital extraction teams have finalized their analysis, he said. We've reconstructed the full timeline of the conspiracy. The shell companies, the forged documents, the surveillance protocols, the coordination with your former family attorney. I poured my coffee and waited. Mr. Lockwood, your daughter is not a secondary actor, Agent Holland said. She is being charged as the primary conspirator under Title 18 United States Code. The evidence clearly demonstrates she recruited Mr. Travers specifically for his criminal expertise. She designed the asset stripping infrastructure. She ordered the fabrication of medical documents. She initiated the surveillance protocols. I looked at Clara's photograph on the office wall. Her kind face. Her gentle eyes. The woman who'd believed the best of everyone. What are the formal charges? I asked. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud under Section 1343, Agent Holland said. Attempted identity theft, conspiracy to commit extortion, falsification of medical records, and we're coordinating with the Iowa State Bar Association on additional charges related to conspiracy to suborn perjury. When will the arrest warrant be executed? Within 48 hours, Agent Holland said. We wanted to give you advance notice out of respect for your cooperation. The U.S. Attorney's Office will be holding a press conference Thursday afternoon. Your name will be mentioned only as the victim and the reporting party. Truth is a heavy, slow-moving machine, but when it finally arrives, it cuts clean to the bone, and the facts become undeniable even to those who spent years denying them. Thank you for the notice, I said. Mr. Lockwood, I want you to know in 23 years with the Bureau, I've never seen a victim document a conspiracy this thoroughly, Agent Holland said. The evidence you compiled, the recordings, the paper trails, it made our job significantly easier. You probably saved yourself years of litigation. I had good help, I said. Still, most people in your position would have signed the papers just to keep the peace. You chose differently. I chose to survive, I said. I ended the call and sat in the quiet office for a long moment. The system had officially verified what my eyes had seen months ago. My daughter wasn't a victim. She wasn't misguided. She wasn't corrupted by her husband's influence. She was the architect. A deep, clean lightness settled over me. Not happiness, not vindication, just the profound relief of being believed. I finished my coffee and walked outside. The October morning was cold and clear. Frost clung to the rich black soil. The harvested cornfields stretched in every direction, empty and waiting for winter. I walked the entire perimeter of my 400 acres. I checked the combine harvesters parked in the equipment barn. I inspected the drainage gates along the irrigation channels. I ran my calloused hand along the old wooden fence lines my grandfather had built in 1954. Everything was exactly where it belonged. No predatory loans, no forged deeds, no conspirators lurking in city apartments calculating the optimal year for my death. It was entirely mine. I walked to the center of the North 40, where the soil was darkest and richest, where Clara used to bring her books on summer afternoons. I knelt down in the dirt and scooped up a handful of earth. Dark, cold, heavy with moisture from yesterday's rain. I let it sift slowly through my weathered fingers. Grain by grain, the same soil my grandfather had worked, the same soil my father had worked, the same soil I'd worked for 50 years. I let that Iowa dirt sift through my fingers and understood something fundamental. Land doesn't care about your drama, your betrayals, your conspiracies. It only responds to your labor. My soil, my labor, my life's work. Secure. No one could take it now. The legal fortress was complete. The will was ironclad. The federal investigation was underway. The financial pipes were capped. The gates were locked. I'd spent 6 months preparing for a war I hoped would never come. And when it came, I'd won it so completely that my enemies would spend the next decade in federal prison. I brushed my hands off and stood. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning frost. The fields would be ready for winter wheat in 3 weeks. The equipment would need maintenance before spring planting. The drainage system needed inspection before the ground froze. There was still work to be done. I walked back toward the farmhouse, my boots crunching through the frozen stubble. Hugh was making breakfast in the kitchen. I could smell coffee and bacon through the open window. A normal morning. A working farm. A man who'd defended what was his. I stopped halfway across the field and looked back at the land. For 6 months, every time I'd walked these fields, I'd seen my daughter's face. Her childhood laughter, her teenage defiance, her adult calculation, the ghost of who she'd been and the monster she'd become. But standing there in the cold October morning with frost melting under the climbing sun, I realized something had changed. I stood up, brushed the rich black earth from my hands, and looked out at the endless rows of harvested corn stalks waiting for winter. For the first time in 6 months, I stood in my fields and didn't see my daughter's face. I only saw the next season. But her physical presence still lingered in one place, the west wing of my own house, the space she'd claimed and filled with her executive illusions. It was time to take that back, too. I hadn't stepped into the west wing of my own house for nearly a year, the space my daughter had claimed as her executive office, and it was time to take it back. The door opened with a creak. The room smelled like her expensive perfume and leather furniture polish. Italian leather chairs. A glass desk that probably cost more than my truck. Imported rugs. Abstract art on walls that used to hold Clara's quilting patterns. This had been my wife's sewing room. the place where she'd mended our clothes and hummed old songs while afternoon light came through the windows. My daughter had gutted it, shoved all of Clara's things into the basement, and turned it into what she called her executive satellite office. I started with the desk, drawers full of expensive stationery business cards, with titles that meant nothing. Promotional materials for real estate developments that would never be built. I dumped it all into boxes. Every item I removed was another square foot of my house reclaimed. The Italian furniture would go to a consignment dealer in Des Moines. The art would be donated. The rugs rolled up and stored until I decided what to do with them. Every box I sealed was another piece of my freedom coming home. I worked methodically. No anger, no nostalgia, just the practical work of removing an infestation. Behind the integrated mahogany bookcase, expensive modern, completely out of place in a farmhouse, I found a small black notebook wedged between the wall and the shelf. I pulled it out and opened it. Personal annotations, handwritten, my daughter's precise script. Estate liquidation timeline, option A, natural causes, option B, competency declaration, option C, emergency medical event. Each option had detailed subcategories. Estimated cash yields from selling the 400 acres, $4.2 million at current agricultural land values. Liquidation value of Des Moines commercial property, $1.8 million. Projected royalty buyout from agrochem patents, $6.5 million lump sum versus ongoing payments. Target investment portfolios for post-inheritance era. Diversified holdings, international real estate, hedge fund allocations. She had planned my erasure like a corporate merger. Multiple scenarios, backup plans for backup plans, all revolving around my death or incapacitation. I sealed the final box of her belongings and looked around the empty room. This used to be my wife's sewing room, the place where she mended our clothes and hummed old songs. It was bare now, just the way it was meant to be. I placed the notebook in the plastic crate I'd labeled Federal Evidence Supplemental. Hugh would deliver it to Agent Holland tomorrow. No malice, no anger, just janitorial clearing of trash. I spent the afternoon moving Clara's sewing machine back upstairs from the basement. Her fabric bins, her quilting frame, her button collection in mason jars. Everything my daughter had discarded, I returned to its proper place. By evening, the West Wing looked like itself again. Afternoon light through the windows. Clara's chair by the window. The room where she'd made things with her hands, where she'd created beauty out of scraps. Clara's chair sat by the window again. The room where she had created beauty out of scraps, it belonged to her once more. 2 weeks passed. Late October brought the predictable systemic fallout. Yasmin's luxury city rental was forcefully repossessed after 3 consecutive months of non-payment. The landlord filed eviction proceedings. Her belongings were placed in storage with a 30-day retrieval deadline before auction. Marvin remained in federal detention without bail. The magistrate had flagged him as a severe flight risk due to the dual counterfeit passports and the attempted Mexico departure. His public defender filed motions that were summarily denied. Gerald Whitmore, the corrupt family attorney, received immediate suspension from the Iowa State Bar Association, pending criminal prosecution. His law practice closed. His clients were reassigned. His reputation was destroyed. The high-end brokerage firm where Yasmin worked issued a public statement terminating her contract, effective immediately following news of the federal investigation. Professional misconduct, violation of ethics standards, protection of firm reputation. She was somewhere in the city, no vehicle, no corporate credit, no career, no assets. A ghost haunting the wreckage of her own conspiracy. I learned these details not through investigation, but through casual conversation. Small-town Iowa is efficient with information. Floyd Hewitt stopped by the porch one evening with a box of fresh produce from his garden. Floyd was 68, a retired county sheriff who'd farmed the adjacent 200 acres for 40 years. We'd been neighbors since I was 25. "Hear your girl is caught up in some heavy federal business, Morris," Floyd said, setting the box on the porch rail. I'm real sorry to hear it. I looked at my old friend. Don't be sorry, Floyd. The math is just balancing out. Floyd nodded slowly. Heard she tried to pull something with forged papers. That true? That's true, I said. Well, Floyd said, adjusting his cap. I guess some people think they're above the law until the law reminds them otherwise. I guess so, I said. Floyd looked out at my fields. You doing all right, Morris? I know this can't be easy, even if she brought it on herself. I'm doing fine, I said, and I meant it. Floyd stayed for coffee. We talked about winter wheat planting schedules and equipment maintenance and the weather forecast. Normal things. Farmer things. The conversation I'd have with any neighbor on any October evening. When he left, I stood on the porch watching his truck disappear down the gravel road. 14 days. Everything she'd built on lies had collapsed in 14 days. Her rental, her career, her co-conspirators, her freedom, her reputation. I hadn't needed to do anything beyond that initial 72-hour counteroffensive. After that, the system had taken over. The consequences had cascaded automatically, mechanically, inevitably. They say greed is a fire that eventually consumes its own house. I watched it burn down her life in 14 days, and I felt no joy, just a deep, clean exhaustion. I stood on my porch, watching Floyd's truck disappear down the gravel road, and I thought about that old saying, greed is a fire that eventually consumes its own house. I had watched it burn down my daughter's life in exactly 14 days, but the story wasn't finished. One final revelation would arrive not through investigation or confrontation, but through a quiet knock on my farmhouse door. When the CEO of Midwest Agritech Corporation flew personally to Des Moines and drove out to my farmhouse in early November, I knew this wasn't about the $28 million contract we'd already signed. Desmond Sinclair arrived in a rental sedan, not a corporate car. He wore a business suit but carried a worn leather briefcase that looked like it had traveled a long distance. I met him at the door and invited him into the kitchen. Simple white mugs, black coffee from my old percolator. The same oak table where Clara and I had eaten breakfast for 40 years. Desmond sat across from me and looked around the room. The old stove, the worn countertops, the window looking out at endless rows of harvested corn. Then he looked at me, a 70-year-old man in a faded flannel shirt. He bowed his head slightly. Not a corporate gesture. Something more genuine. We conducted an exhaustive due diligence review on your operation before initiating contact, Mr. Lockwood, he said. Not just for the patents we licensed. We go deeper than most companies. We trace intellectual property lineage back to its origins. I poured more coffee and waited. I requested this face-to-face meeting because there is an administrative matter we need to resolve, Desmond continued. Completely outside the scope of our new contract. What kind of administrative matter requires a CEO to fly here personally? I asked. Desmond opened his briefcase and pulled out a yellowed journal. The pages were brittle with age. The cover was faded, but I recognized it immediately. International Agricultural Science Quarterly. Volume 34, Issue 2, Spring 1987. He placed it on the table and turned it so I could read the author byline on the featured article. Low-loss macro irrigation systems, a mathematical framework for sustainable water distribution in large-scale agricultural applications. Author Morris Lockwood. I stared at my name printed in that academic typeface. 38 years old. I'd been 32 when I wrote that paper. Unknown, unpublished. Working in a university extension office by day and running calculations in my farmhouse office at night. This paper, Desmond said quietly, became the mathematical bedrock of modern smart agriculture. Your framework is taught in every agricultural engineering program in the world. The irrigation systems feeding 17% of global farmland are built on equations you developed in this kitchen. I looked at the executive sitting across from my old stove and realized he hadn't traveled across the country just to collect a signature. There was a ghost in his folder, and that ghost had my name on it from 1987. You sold the absolute intellectual property rights to a domestic technology syndicate In 1987, Desmond said. Our forensic IP team spent 2 years tracing the lineage. That syndicate was absorbed by larger companies dozens of times over the decades. Your name was misspelled in subsequent filings. The original contribution was buried under layers of corporate acquisitions. I remember, I said quietly. You sold those rights for $8,000, Desmond said. According to the contract we recovered from the National Patent Archive. 8,300, I said. I remember the exact number. May I ask why you sold revolutionary intellectual property for that amount? I looked out the window at the fields, at the place where Clara used to walk. My wife had cancer, I said. Experimental treatment, not covered by insurance. Our daughter was 2 years old. I needed the money immediately. Desmond nodded slowly. The treatment worked. For 11 years, I said. She died in 1998. But we had 11 years we wouldn't have had otherwise. Desmond reached into his briefcase and pulled out a certified corporate check. He slid it across the table. Midwest Agritech Corporation is issuing retroactive royalty restitution for intellectual property that was undervalued at the time of sale, he said. Our legal team and our ethics board agree this is not just appropriate, it's necessary. We are here to restore the historical ledger. I looked at the check. $4,200,000. 38 years is a long time to wait for justice. But when it finally arrives, it doesn't feel like money. It feels like someone finally acknowledged the weight you've been carrying alone. This amount represents a conservative calculation of what you should have received in ongoing royalties from 1987 to present, Desmond said. Adjusted for inflation and market penetration. Our actuaries believe we're still undervaluing your contribution, but this is what we can justify to our shareholders as historically defensible restitution. I couldn't speak. I looked at that yellowed journal from 1987, at my name printed in clean academic type, at the equations I'd developed at this same kitchen table while Clara slept upstairs and our infant daughter breathed softly in her crib. I remembered the night I signed away those rights. The hospital waiting room, the fluorescent lights, the representative from the syndicate with his leather briefcase and his standard contract. My wife was under sedation 3 floors above me. The experimental treatment had begun that morning. Our 2-year-old daughter was sleeping at the neighbor's house. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. $8,300. Enough to cover 6 months of treatment. Enough to buy time. I sold my future to buy her a few more months of life, and she lived 11 more years. 11 years of morning coffee. 11 years of watching our daughter grow. 11 years of walking these fields together. 11 years I would never trade for any amount of money. Mr. Lockwood, Desmond said gently, are you all right? I picked up the check. The paper felt impossibly light for the weight of what it represented. I'm fine, I said. Thank you for finding this, for coming here personally. It was the right thing to do, Desmond said. He stood and extended his hand. Your work changed the world, Mr. Lockwood. It was time someone acknowledged that. I shook his hand and walked him to the door. When his rental sedan disappeared down the gravel drive, I sat back down at the kitchen table and looked at that check for $4.2 million. I didn't see the money. I only saw that hospital room in 1987. My wife under sedation. My 2-year-old daughter sleeping at the neighbor's house. My hands signing away my future because it was the only future that mattered. I wondered if my wife was looking down at this old oak table. The final public reckoning came not through federal court or police custody, but through something far more devastating, cameras rolling at exactly the wrong moment. When the regional news crew from Des Moines pulled up to my gate in mid-November to film a segment about the historic patent deals, I had no idea my daughter would choose that exact moment to make her final appearance. The crew had called ahead. A producer named Jennifer, professional and enthusiastic, wanted to document what she called a remarkable Iowa success story. The 70-year-old farmer whose intellectual property had finally been recognized. the $28 million licensing deal, the $4.2 million restitution after 38 years, human interest, local triumph, agricultural innovation. They arrived at 2 in the afternoon. 3 people. Camera operator, sound technician, on-air correspondent. Professional equipment. I stood on my porch and answered their questions about the 1987 paper, about modern irrigation systems, about what it felt like to have my work acknowledged after nearly 4 decades. The cameras were rolling when I heard the car. A battered sedan, 10 years old, making a grinding noise as it pulled up behind the news van. The engine sputtered. Died. The car door opened. My daughter stepped out. She looked nothing like the polished real estate executive who'd sat at my dining table demanding $700,000. Her hair was unwashed. Her clothes were wrinkled. Her face was gaunt. She didn't see the cameras until it was too late. She took 3 steps toward the gate before she noticed the equipment. The professional lights. The news van with its station logo. The camera pointed in her direction. She froze for exactly 1 second. Then she lunged at the wrought iron gate. "Dad!" she screamed. "Dad, please, you have to talk to me." The camera operator swiveled. Professional instinct. The lens tracked her movement. "I have nothing left," Yasmin shouted, grabbing the bars. "No job, no money, no place to live. You did this to me." The correspondent stepped back, uncertain. The sound technician kept recording. I stood on my porch 50 feet away and looked at my daughter. Then I looked at the high-definition lenses recording every second of this interaction. I said absolutely nothing. I turned around, stepped back into my house, and closed the door with absolute gentleness. No anger, no drama, just a soft click of the latch. I locked my front door and didn't care what the cameras captured. I knew exactly who I was, and that was more than enough. Through the window, I watched the correspondent approach Yasmin, carefully, microphone extended. I saw my daughter realize what had just happened. Saw her face crumple. Saw her release the gate and stumble back to her car. The segment aired 24 hours later, not as sensationalist family drama, as a clinical study in a father's total silent detachment. The producer had edited it carefully. The success story, the patent deals, the historic restitution, and then at the end, the unexpected arrival, the desperate daughter. The father who looked at her looked at the cameras and simply closed his door. No commentary, no judgment, just footage. "Floyd called me that evening. Saw you on the news, Morris. They handled it with respect." "I appreciate that," I said. "Your daughter looked rough," he said carefully. "Yes," I said. "She did." The segment went viral in regional agricultural circles, then in Des Moines business networks. The exact high society associates Yasmin had spent a decade trying to impress were the exact people who shared the video link across the city. Her public humiliation was complete. Late November brought the final phone call. I was in the kitchen when Agent Holland called, his voice carrying the weight of formal federal action. "Mr. Lockwood, we have executed the primary arrest warrant," he said. "Yasmin Travers was taken into federal custody at 10:14 a.m. this morning." I sat at the kitchen table. "Where?" "At her former real estate firm," Agent Holland said. "She was attempting to negotiate an unauthorized exit package. The arrest was conducted in the main office, in front of every former colleague who knew her as a high-flying executive. The FBI had deliberately chosen the venue. Maximum professional humiliation." "What evidence will you be presenting?" I asked. "The text message ordering Plan B execution before customs," Agent Holland said. "The emails from 5 years ago explicitly targeting your unconditional love as a strategic vulnerability. The handwritten Excel spreadsheet calculating the financial utility of your death at different timelines. The forged medical documents. The fabricated guardianship petition. The timeline_BF surveillance file. Some people spend their entire lives building elaborate facades, and when those facades finally crumble, they discover there was nothing underneath but calculation and greed. The evidentiary foundation is absolute, Agent Holland continued. The U.S. Attorney believes this is among the most thoroughly documented elder financial abuse cases in Iowa history. Your daughter is facing near certain federal conviction. What's the sentencing range? I asked. 8 to 12 years under federal guidelines, Agent Holland said. No parole. Federal prisoners serve minimum 85% of their sentence. I looked at Clara's photograph hanging on the kitchen wall. Her kind face, her gentle eyes. Thank you for your work, Agent Holland, I said, for taking this seriously, for believing me. You made it easy, Mr. Lockwood, he said. You documented everything. Most victims don't have that presence of mind. I had good help, I said. I hung up the phone and sat in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the Iowa winter was settling into the dirt. The fields were bare. The trees were skeletal against a slate-colored sky. Everything looked dead, but I knew it was just sleeping. Waiting. I stood and walked to Clara's photograph. I touched the frame gently. We did everything we could, Clara, I said softly. It's over. I looked out at my 400 acres as the afternoon light faded. The land stretched empty and cold in every direction. Some winters are necessary for spring to have any meaning at all. The renewal didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, deliberately, one decision at a time, starting with a phone call the morning before Thanksgiving. Felix Rawlings called me with news that should have surprised me. Yasmin had rejected the plea deal. 10 years reduced to 7, most defendants would have signed in seconds. But my daughter wasn't most defendants. She still believed she was the smartest person in every room, even when that room was a federal prosecutor's office. Her attorney tried to convince her, Felix said. The U.S. attorney made it clear this was the best offer she'd receive. But she insisted she'd win at trial. She told her lawyer the jury would sympathize with a daughter whose father hoarded millions. So she guarantees the maximum sentence, I said. Yes, Felix said, and eliminates any chance of early parole. She'll serve at least 85%. I felt no surprise. Just grim satisfaction that she'd remained exactly who she was. I hung up and stood in my dining room looking at the table where my family had gathered for Thanksgiving for 47 years. Empty now. Silent. For the first time, the silence felt clean. I picked up the phone and called Colorado. Carlton Briggs answered on the second ring. He was 73, a retired agricultural engineer who'd testified during the patent litigation about a handshake agreement from 1991. We'd stayed in touch over the years, the kind of friendship that didn't require constant maintenance, but felt solid when you reached for it. Morris, he said warmly, I was hoping you'd call. You doing anything for Thanksgiving? I asked. I was planning to heat up a frozen dinner and watch football, Carlton said, but I'm hoping you're about to offer me a better option. Drive to Iowa, I said. I'll cook. Carlton laughed. I'll leave tonight. See you by morning. He arrived at dawn on Thanksgiving Day. We prepared a simple meal together, turkey, potatoes, rolls. No performance, no hidden agendas, no one calculating inheritance shares. We talked about old engineering projects, about farming techniques, about the people we'd lost. Carlton's hands weathered like my own, scarred from decades of farm equipment, and laboratory prototypes moved with practiced efficiency as he carved the turkey. These were hands that built things, fixed things, created value, not hands that signed fraudulent documents in parking lots. I laughed genuinely for the first time in months. That evening, sitting in the living room with coffee, Carlton asked what I'd do with the settlement money. I looked at Clara's photograph on the mantel. I've been thinking about what she cared about, I said. Education, opportunity, farm kids who couldn't afford college. Carlton nodded slowly. Clara would like that. I want to establish an endowment, I said, in her name, for agricultural students from family farms. That's exactly right, Carlton said quietly. Monday morning I called Felix with instructions. I want to establish the Clara Hayes Memorial Endowment Fund for agricultural students at Iowa State University, I said. 30% of the ongoing agrochem royalties, that's approximately $8.4 million annually, plus the entire $4.2 million restitution. Felix was silent for a long moment. "Morris," he finally said, "that's the best use of money I've ever witnessed." The following Thursday, I met with Iowa State University's development director and the dean of the College of Agriculture in Ames. Deanna Moss, 52, and clearly experienced in cultivating major donors, presented endowment projections with barely concealed excitement. "The fund will support approximately 140 full scholarships annually," she said, "in perpetuity." James Cantrell, 61, and dean of the College of Agriculture, outlined the selection process. "We can structure the criteria however you'd like, Mr. Lockwood. Preference for students from family farms," I said. "Financial need, academic merit, no legacy admissions, no exceptions for wealthy donors' children." "Understood," James said, making notes. "Transparent annual reporting." "Required," I said. December 4th arrived cold and clear. In a small conference room in Des Moines, I signed the endowment documents. Felix witnessed. A university photographer stood by to document the moment. She positioned her camera. "Mr. Lockwood, would you like to smile for the photograph?" I looked at Clara's name printed on the document in formal legal typography. "No," I said. "This isn't about me." The photographer took one picture. Me sitting at the table. Clara's name visible. No smile. Just documentation. That evening, I sat at my dining room table with the copy of the endowment agreement. Clara Hayes Memorial Endowment Fund for Agricultural Students. Outside, the first real snow of the season began to fall. The snow fell in that particular Midwestern way, not dramatic, not violent, just steady and inevitable, covering everything, changing the landscape one flake at a time until nothing looked the same, but somehow it all looked cleaner. I read her name again and again. I wasn't thinking about how she died. I wasn't thinking about what was stolen. I was thinking about what would continue because she lived. 140 farm kids every year. For generations. Kids who worked hard, who came from families like mine, who understood what it meant to tend land and trust seasons. Clara's name would be spoken at graduation ceremonies, printed in university catalogs, remembered not for how she died, but for what she enabled others to become. I stood and looked at my reflection in the window against the falling snow. The man looking back was 70 years old, scarred by betrayal, changed by loss, but something fundamental had shifted. My daughter would spend the next decade in federal prison. My wealth would educate farm kids for generations. And for the first time since Clara passed 12 years ago, I didn't feel her absence. I felt her presence, not in the grief, not in the emptiness, but in the scholarship fund that would carry her name forward, in the students who would receive opportunities because she'd been loved, in the land we'd worked together that would continue feeding families long after we were both gone. I touched the window glass where snow was accumulating on the other side. Cold, clean, new, but I wasn't finished yet. There was one more trip to take, one more place Clara had always wanted to visit together. And this time I wouldn't be going alone. The journey Clara had always wanted was simpler than I expected. Not exotic, not expensive, just away, just quiet, just the chance to think without static. The pencil moved across the engineering notebook with a fluidity I hadn't felt in 3 years, smooth, certain, uninterrupted by the static that had filled my mind since Clara's death. I sat by the stone fireplace in Carlton's cabin in the Colorado Rocky Mountains, sketching an atmospheric water harvesting system for arid agricultural zones. The calculus flowed. The equations solved themselves. Carlton watched over my shoulder as complex formulas filled the pages. "You're doing it again, aren't you?" he said quietly. "Been a long time since the water ran this clear," I said. Carlton nodded. "Clara would say you were never broken, just interrupted." I spent mornings trekking through light powder snow in the foothills, afternoons, staring at the massive Rocky Mountain expanse. No cellular alerts, no legal documents, no noise. The fourth invention, a concept that had lingered for 3 years, pushed to the margins by constant friction poured onto pages with mathematical precision. My daughter's voice had been static. Her absence was clarity. The Colorado silence was a different animal than Iowa quiet mountain silence pressed down like altitude while prairie silence stretched horizontal to every edge. One made you small. The other reminded you the land didn't end at your property line. I returned to Iowa on Christmas Eve. The farmhouse stood dark and empty. I unpacked my bag, started coffee, looked at the silent phone on the kitchen counter. For the first time in 47 years, no family gathering was planned. No poisonous undercurrents. No calculations. No performance. The silence felt different than loneliness. It felt like possibility. Christmas morning arrived cold and clear. At 9 o'clock, I heard tires on the gravel drive. A solitary town car pulled up to the gate. The back doors opened. 2 children stepped out, each carrying a small duffel bag. Otto, 11 years old, moved with a gravity beyond his years. Ren, 9, clutched a worn stuffed rabbit. Their mother was detained in a federal facility awaiting trial, but they didn't know the details yet. I opened the gate. Ren ran forward through the snow and buried her face in my coat. Otto stood before me, his eyes old. "Mom said she had to stay in the city for business, Grandpa," he said carefully. "She said we should stay with you." I dropped to one knee in the snow and wrapped my arms around both of them. "As long as you need," I said. That afternoon, I took them to the outbuildings. I taught them how to read the winter wind, how to identify soil quality under frost. Otto asked questions about everything. Ren collected icicles like treasures. The farmhouse echoed with children's laughter for the first time in years. That evening by the wood stove, Ren fell asleep across my lap, the stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Otto sat beside me reading one of Clara's old books from the shelf. I looked at them and didn't think of their mother, only their future. 3 days later, Felix called with the final disposition. "Marvin's sentence came through," he said. 12 years federal penitentiary, 0 parole eligibility. And Yasmin, the magistrate struck all her pretrial motions. The U.S. attorney is seeking 8 to 12 years under federal guidelines. Her trial date is set for February. The family attorney, disbarred for life, 18-month suspended sentence. I listened to the numbers like weather forecasts. Information about forces beyond my control. "The ledger is balanced, Morris," Felix said quietly. "Thank you, Felix," I said, "for everything." New Year's Eve. I sat at my desk under the yellow banker's lamp working on the 4th patent calculations. The grandchildren were asleep upstairs in rooms that hadn't held children in decades. Midnight approached. Distant fireworks echoed from town. I checked my watch, gave a single slow nod to the new year, and continued writing. The work felt clean. January 1st morning. I woke before dawn and dressed in my heavy coat. The thermometer read 14 degrees. I walked to the center of my 400 acres. I stood at the exact coordinates where this story had opened. Smoke rose from the farmhouse chimney behind me. The horizon stretched sharp and clear. I assessed the past 12 months the way you assess a harvest. Lost my biological daughter to greed. Lost trust in old counsel. But preserved the land, my autonomy, my dignity, my future. Brutal year, and the cleanest year in decades. I knelt in the snow and broke off a piece of frozen earth. The frozen earth broke with the specific sound I'd heard 10,000 times. Not a crack, not a snap, but something between them. The sound of Iowa clay giving up one molecule at a time. The sound of permanence. Iowa dirt. Worn cold, completely unyielding. No one could steal it. This land had witnessed everything. Clara's laughter. My daughter's childhood. The quiet years after Clara passed. The slow rot of family turning predatory. The federal investigation. The trials. The grandchildren arriving Christmas morning seeking shelter. The fields didn't care. They responded only to labor. I stood, brushed the rich black earth from my hands, and looked back toward the farmhouse. Otto stood on the porch in his borrowed jacket watching me. I raised one hand. He raised his back. I walked toward the house as the light grew stronger. The engineering notebook waited on my desk. The grandchildren would want breakfast. The fourth patent needed another day of calculations. Spring planting would come in 14 weeks. I didn't look back at the frozen fields. They would still be there tomorrow, and the day after, and long after I was gone. Some things cannot be stolen. I remembered my grandfather's voice from 50 years ago, standing in these same fields. The dirt doesn't care about your drama. It only responds to your labor. I was 70 years old, and I had finally proven the old man right. I walked back toward the farmhouse as light faded the engineering notebook in my coat pocket, my grandchildren's laughter waiting inside the frozen fields stretching behind me like a promise kept. And to you listening to my story, remember this: trust is earned through actions, not assumed through blood. I want to be honest about my mistakes. For years, I ignored warning signs because I wanted to believe my daughter was still the girl who walked these fields with me. I confused hope with evidence. Don't make that mistake. The moment something feels wrong, document everything: emails, texts, conversations. That paper trail saved my farm and my future. Here's what I learned through this trial: sometimes the people closest to you become strangers, and that's not your failure, it's theirs. Family stories of revenge aren't really about getting even. They're about protecting what you've built with your own hands. I believe God put me through this to show me the difference between genuine love and calculated manipulation. When you face family stories of revenge in your own life, remember that documentation isn't paranoia, it's wisdom. Protect yourself legally, financially, and emotionally. Blood relations don't define your family. Loyalty and integrity do. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice to protect yourself from family? What would you have done in my situation? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you or might help someone facing similar family stories of revenge, please share it. Subscribe to Dad. Family Revenge for more real stories about standing up for what's right. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time matters to me. One final note. Some details in this story have been adapted for storytelling purposes, but the core message about protecting yourself remains absolutely true.